This is tranquilizer. This is Ann Barnhart, as you probably know. She's one of our favorite guests. So Ann is the owner of Cornerstone Cattle Marketing. It's an education and consulting firm that teaches people about cattle marketing. And until recently, she owned and operated a successful commodities brokerage, Barnhart Capital Management, Inc., which she had to close down after the meltdown of MF Global. She's a conservative blogger and warrior against all things evil. You probably have heard her either here or maybe even on our show, Freedom Talk Nigcast. And by the way, I've mentioned Freedom Talk. There's some flyers up front if you want to take one. It's a 24/7 internet show that you can access anytime you want and listen to these interviews. My latest interview with Ann is up there right now. And then, of course, there's archives as well. Plus, there's a special page we set up just for all her stuff. So, Ann is going to talk tonight about the French Revolution and a story that very few people know. It's about the genocide perpetrated by the atheist, proto-Marxist French Revolution against the Catholic Church, which killed a staggering 450,000 people in northwest France from 1793 to 1796, and how that same progression is playing out in America today. And the French government refuses to acknowledge this, is it Vendée?
Vendée.
Vendée genocide, because, you know, that would cast a bad pall over the French Revolution. So, and by the way, proto means the first or earliest form of or original. So even though Marx wasn't born at this time, these ideas are still circulating. Miss Ann Barnhart.
Hey. Thank you. Thank you. Stop. Thank you for coming out tonight. Thank you for having me. You might be sitting there thinking, oh, I don't want to hear about France, a bunch of cheese-eating surrender monkeys. What do I care about the French? Well, you better care, because what happened during the French Revolution, and I'm so glad that Mara pointed out the term proto-Marxist. Marx wasn't even born until 1818, I believe, and I believe that the manifesto was published in 1848. Marx looked heavily to the French Revolution and for the Enlightenment ideas that came out of the French Revolution. It influenced him tremendously. And the tactics of Marxist tyrannies in the 19th and especially the 20th century, in terms of the Bolshevik Revolution in the Soviet Union and also the Bolshevik revolution that happened in Mexico. I don't know if you all just saw the movie that came out about the Cristero War. That was a Bolshevik revolution. They specifically patterned their tactics after what happened in France from 1793 to 1796 during the Vendée genocide. The Soviets used it, the Mexicans used it, and guess who else is using exactly the same template today? What other communists do you know? How about that evil piece of crap right there? Barack Hussein Obama and his communist cadre are using exactly the tactics that were used. And what happened in France ended up with 450,000 people dead in a civil war that is not even acknowledged. To this day, isn't even acknowledged. How many were killed in the American Civil War? 650,000 or so? This happened in a relatively small area in France. 450,000 people dead, and no one will even talk about this. How many of you were taught in school that the French Revolution was good and cool and kind of like the American Revolution? I was, and I was in school in the 80s. Oh yeah, the French Revolution was awful. It was absolutely awful. The French Revolution is what happens when you take the American founding documents and give them just a little bit of that tyrannical socialist tweak. It descends almost instantly into tyranny, almost instantly, and that's what we're seeing right now. So understanding what happened in the Vendée is absolutely critical, okay? So there's two books that I sourced heavily for this presentation. The first is called For Altar and Throne, The Rising in the Vendée by Michael Davies. I believe it's out of print, but thanks to the internet and book dealers, you can get a hold of this book, and it's actually a very small little book. It's just a thin little book like this, but it's filled with information, and you can get a hold of it. You might have to pay a little bit more than $15 for it, but it's out there. The second book that I'm sourcing heavily off of is this book, A French Genocide, The Vendée by Reynald Séché. It was originally written in French, and then it's translated into English by George Hollock. And it has tremendous, tremendous detail in terms of the number of dead, in terms of structures destroyed, in terms of percent of the population killed, percent of the population displaced. Very, very heavily researched book, very hard to argue with. And it also quotes tremendously on a lot of source documents that were written by both sides, both by the French revolutionaries, the bad guys, and by the Vendée civilians and clergy themselves, documenting what was happening to them during this genocide. So to orient ourselves, this is a map of France. Geography in this country is really bad, so let's do a review of our geography. Here's the English Channel right here. Up here at the top is the United Kingdom, is England. London would be about here. This is France. This right here is Belgium. Here's Germany right here. Here's Switzerland. Here's Italy. This is the Mediterranean, so this is the Riviera of France. And here's the Pyrenees Mountains, and this down here is Spain. So are we oriented to the map? Now let me show you the area that we're talking about. This is the Vendée region. It's not very big. It's not very big at all. In fact, I've heard things that, it could be analogized to the square mileage in Arapahoe County, It's not a terribly big area here. Kind of in the northwest/west central coastal area of France, and this is the Loire River here, and it's dealing with this Loire Valley and so forth. Okay, so that's where we are. What I'm going to do is most of the slides are going to be cut in half, and half is going to talk about the Vendée, and the other half is going to be the analog in the United States today. So first, starting on the left with the Vendée, it was an agricultural peasant population. That area of France was agricultural, heavily wooded, but also lots of farming and grazing going on as well. The peasant population was considered backward, superstitious, overly religious, inferior, unenlightened people who needed to be saved from themselves by the urban proto-Marxist revolutionaries. Does that sound familiar to you? Yeah, that really is a direct analogy to what's called flyover country today in the United States, which is to say the central United States and the Mountain West, disqualifying the coasts, which are, of course, basically populated by Marxists at this point. Okay, and the governments on the coastal states are run by Marxists. Hence, California in a state of profound financial collapse, and deciding, well, let's spend $3.5 billion on a monorail that nobody's going to ride. Things like that. Okay, absolutely helpless government. No common sense, all Marxism. On the United States side today, who are we? Well, we're kind of considered the agricultural peasant population. We're considered backward, superstitious, overly religious. What did Obama say? That we cling to our guns and religion? Yeah, remember that? Inferior, unenlightened people who needed to be saved from themselves by the urban, coastal, Marxist revolutionaries. And let's not sugarcoat it, that's what Obama and his cadre are. They are Marxist, communist, fascist revolutionaries. They've usurped our government, they've already got it taken over, and they are now to the point where they are trying to utterly collapse and destroy the entire government so that they can rebuild a new fascist, let's call it Marxist fascist government in its place. So already we have a massive point of commonality. Next, the Vendée population was up until this point content with the nobles that they lived under and the class structure. There was good relations between landowners, merchants, and peasants. Up until the 18th century so-called Enlightenment, taxes and the economy were stable. Now, here's where Americans start to get a little bit tense. Wait, they were living under nobles? Well, sure they were. They were under the Ancien regime, all of the King Louis, you know, Louis the 13th, 14th, 15th, 16th, and so on and so forth. Well, we Americans, we bristle at the thought of a monarchy and living under nobles and so forth. If you think about it, though, it's different, but there's points of commonality. For example, I live up in Denver. Who's the family that owns the big brewery out in Golden? What's their name? Coors. Okay, do you begrudge the fact that the Coors Brewing Company is passed down from generation to generation? And, you know, who was the first one? Adolph Coors started it, and now we're at Pete Coors, and I don't know who all the names of the family members are. Do you begrudge them that? They're providing jobs. They love their employees, and as I understand it, their employees love them. There are a lot of people where families have worked for generations for the Coors family. It's not nobility, it's not royalty. The difference in the United States is that we have mobility. Now, if the Coors family goes off the tracks and if they stop making good beer and nobody buys their beer anymore, or they make horrible, horrible business decisions, what could happen? They could lose it, right? And then maybe the next generation, there wouldn't be any more rich Coors family. There wouldn't be a Coors Brewing Company anymore. But as long as they keep going and they run their business well, it could go on for generations and generations. None of us begrudge people that. Think of it as the same way. The people worked underneath these nobles. They had good relations. Everybody was content. It was fine. These people were not being horrifically mistreated by the nobility class. And that's something that you always have to keep in mind when you're reading history, especially from the American perspective, because we almost have it in our DNA that we're not supposed to like royalty. But you got to understand, for a lot of people, the system worked well for them. They weren't upset. In the United States, the population was generally content with the class structure, and like I said, our big difference was we had excellent mobility between the classes. Good relations between business owners, tradesmen, and laborers, and up until the 20th century, taxes and the economy were largely stable. Up until the beginning of the 20th century, with the introduction of the income tax and the Federal Reserve, which the Federal Reserve immediately started stealing from the population by allowing inflation, targeting a 2% inflation, which basically destroys a person's capacity to save over the course of their working life. So up until the early 20th century, it was pretty much the same thing, except we had this incredible class mobility, which is a good thing. Don't get me wrong, I think that's great. In the Vendée, the government demonstrated subsidiarity. Do you know what subsidiarity means? Where most of the power is with the individual, and then the next largest level of power is at the local level, and then the next level of power is at the county, and then the state, and then the smallest level of power is with who? The federal government. So subsidiarity means that as you go up towards a more overarching government, that the power of that government necessarily and morally diminishes, because as much as can be handled at the local level should be handled at the local level. That's how this country was set up. It was a beautiful model of actually biblical subsidiarity. Comes out of the book of Exodus, when Jethro goes to see Moses, who is sitting on a seat judging every single little quibble of all of these thousands and thousands of people of Israel. And Jethro, who was Moses' father-in-law, said, no, you've got to set this up so that the power is first with the family, then with the neighborhood, then yada, build, and then you, Moses, you should only be handling and adjudicating the most serious things that cannot be handled at a lower level. That is the original model of subsidiarity, and that's what was actually used to build the template of the United States early on. It's a beautiful system. Macro issues were handled by the Ancien regime, which is the monarchy. France was a patchwork of unified cantons. Not unlike our situation now. The only difference is, yeah, there was that nobility thing. It was being handed down hereditarily. Sure, we're Americans, we don't go for nobility, but understand, the people were content. The system worked. In the United States, government used to demonstrate subsidiarity with local and state governments responsive to local needs. Macro issues were handled by the federal government, a confederation of states. That's what we used to be. We're not anymore, but that's what we used to be, and that's what we've got to get back to. Late in the 18th century, France is broke due to profligate spending recommended by enlightened proto-Marxist bureaucrats surrounding young King Louis XVI, including, and get this, France's significant financing of the American Revolution. They financed it, and they couldn't afford it. Does that sound familiar? It should. 1930s forward, America is driven into massive insolvency by Marxist politicians, profligate domestic spending, and U.S. financing of the UN, the global banking system, and multiple wars from 2001 forward. Very, very similar thing has happened, okay? You get these, in France, they were proto-Marxists because, of course, Marx wasn't here yet. What are we going to call this? Let's call it proto-Marxism, before Marx, what he was patterning off of. They infiltrate, they get in to King Louis XVI's court and Louis XV's court as well, and they're pushing and pushing and pushing for all of this spending. And they didn't have the money. You think we're the first culture to ever go broke? Oh my goodness, no. Goodness, no. So here in the United States, it's basically the same thing. It's been festering for almost a century, and now they realize they've got us. With Obama in there, they've overthrown the entire government. This is going to be the coup de grace. Don't kid yourself. This is it. They are not going to walk away. They have been gunning for this literally for centuries, because if we fall, the entire world falls to these jackals. They are not going to walk away, no matter what happens. Understand that right now, okay? In the Vendée, in the mid to late 18th century, taxes double while the number of taxpayers decreases. I kid you not. Does that sound familiar? Yep. Citizens feel increasingly alienated and ignored by the enlightened central government.